The truth is, I never imagined myself capable of such a fracture. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have answered with unwavering certainty, I was a good wife, a loyal partner. My life with Marcus was built on the foundation of routine and quiet respectability. We had been married for 20 years. 2 decades that had culminated in a lovely, if unremarkable, home in a quiet suburban enclave, a daughter, Leela, whom we were fiercely proud of, and a shared history as predictable and comfortably worn as an heirloom blanket. Marcus was a stable man. An environmental engineer, precise, methodical, and profoundly dependable. He never forgot to set out the recycling bins on Tuesday evenings. He always ensured my electric vehicle was fully charged if he knew I had a long commute the next day. He never, ever raised his voice. For a very long time, I mistook that unwavering consistency for a deep, abiding, passionate love. I believe that was my first, most crucial error. The change wasn't sudden. It was a slow, creeping realization, like a chill that settles deep into the bone marrow, especially in the evenings. After we finished dinner, served promptly at 7 p.m., we would retreat to our chairs. He, scrolling through complex data reports on his tablet. Me, flipping through a novel I couldn't truly focus on. The silence that enveloped us ceased being peaceful. It grew heavy, saturated with all the truths we were neglecting to speak. Lila's imminent departure for the state university, a milestone we had both looked forward to, now seemed to highlight the yawning chasm waiting for us. The realization was stark: once Leela left, there would be no buffer between us, just 2 strangers sharing a mortgage and a past. I attempted to breach the silence. I tried to talk to Marcus about this gnawing feeling that our lives were fading into a neutral background. He would look up from his screen, his kind eyes clouded with confusion behind his meticulous titanium-rimmed glasses, and say, "It's just a new phase, Eleanor. We'll adjust. We always do." He didn't understand. I didn't want to adjust to the quiet. I wanted to shatter it. I wanted life to be loud again. Chapter 2, The Spark and the Lie. That need for noise, for color, led me to the city's philanthropic scene. I began volunteering at the local Museum of Contemporary Art. It was an escape, a way to fill the encroaching hours and connect with something aesthetically beautiful and larger than the mundane. And that is where I met Julian. He was a new corporate patron, a venture capitalist, charming, kinetic, and utterly full of life. Where Marcus was solid, measured earth, Julian was pure, reckless spark. He had a laugh that could dominate a room and a magnetic way of telling a story that made you feel like the most fascinating person in his world. Julian noticed things. He noticed the specific, subtle shade of periwinkle I wore one afternoon. He remembered an offhand comment I had made months prior about my preference for brutalist architecture over Renaissance design. He made me feel intriguing. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in over a decade. It began innocently enough, or so I convinced myself. Emails about upcoming museum galas turned into longer, more personal conversations. Then it was a quick, invigorating coffee downtown. Then a lingering lunch. I clung desperately to the narrative that this was just intellectual camaraderie, a much-needed friendship. It was a lie, of course. A beautiful, appealing lie, infinitely more palatable than the beige truth of my marriage. The first time his hand deliberately brushed against mine, a fleeting, electric touch near a sculpture plinth, a profound jolt went through me. It was a violent reminder of a vibrant, reckless part of myself I thought had gone dormant forever. The guilt was instantaneous and sharp. A cold, heavy stone in my stomach every time I returned home to Marcus, who would inquire politely, "How was your committee meeting, Eleanor?" But the guilt was also intoxicating. It was proof that I was still capable of feeling something strong, something dangerous. The guilt fueled the addiction. I became a meticulous, highly disciplined liar. I crafted elaborate alibis with the dedication of a professional novelist. I had a whole rotating cast of fictional friends, Susan, Carol, Dennis, who were always having crises, celebrations, or needing support that required my presence. I opened a separate, encrypted email account. I policed my phone with paranoia. Marcus, trusting and straightforward to a fault, never suspected a thing. His unwavering faith in my character should have been my moral salvation, but instead, it felt like an anchor dragging me down. His simple, predictable "I love you" before he went to sleep began to feel like a profound accusation. Chapter 3, The Architecture of Justification. The affair with Julian lasted for 6 months. 6 months of living in a state of hypervigilance. Every sense was alert, every emotion amplified. I was inhabiting 2 completely separate worlds, and the physical effort of maintaining the facade was exhausting, yet I was addicted to the constant, secret thrill of the duality. To maintain the necessary emotional distance from Marcus, I began cultivating resentment. I hyper-focused on his small, predictable habits, the quiet way he chewed his food, the predictable documentary channel he watched every evening, his profound contentment with our mundane life. I used that manufactured resentment as a shield to justify my actions. Look what he's made me do, I would think, successfully ignoring the self-evident fact that Marcus had made me do absolutely nothing. I had chosen this path. I had chosen Julian's spark over Marcus's steady flame. My behavior grew careless. I started wearing a new, heady perfume that Julian said he found intoxicating. My responses to Marcus became shorter, more critical. I was actively trying to manufacture a significant conflict, to provoke the confrontation that would allow me to walk away with a grievance. I needed Marcus's real-world failings to finally match the narrative of neglect I was diligently constructing in my head. One Thursday evening, I came home late after a stolen afternoon with Julian. The house was dark, which was unusual. Marcus was typically in the living room by 7:30 p.m. I called out, trying to sound cheerful, but my voice was a little too high, a little too bright. "Honey, I'm home." There was no answer. I walked toward his study. The door was ajar. Marcus was sitting at his desk, but he wasn't working. He wasn't reading. He was simply sitting, staring at a framed photograph. It was a picture of the 3 of us, Marcus, Leela, and me, taken a few months prior at Lila's high school graduation. We were all smiling, the picture of a perfect, happy, functional family. He didn't look up when I stepped into the doorway. "Marcus," I said, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. "Is everything okay?" He slowly turned his head. The look on his face stopped me cold. It wasn't the fury I had anticipated. It wasn't the crushing sadness I had sometimes feared. It was a complete and profound absence of emotion. His eyes, which had always held a steady, gentle warmth for me, were flat and cold, like 2 smooth, pale stones at the bottom of a frozen river. He looked at me for a long, terrible moment, and I felt a chill that started in my spine and spread like ice to my extremities. He knows. He has to know. "Long day," he said finally, his voice eerily calm, level, and toneless. "How was your meeting?" My heart was hammering so hard I was certain he could hear the frantic rhythm. It was fine. Long, you know? The usual budget discussions. I was babbling, stumbling over every syllable. He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. "Good. I'm glad it was productive." Then, with agonizing slowness, he turned back to the framed photograph, effectively dismissing me. I stood there for another full minute, frozen in the doorway, waiting for the dramatic confrontation, the inevitable explosion. But it didn't come. I walked to the kitchen, my hands trembling as I poured a glass of water. I expected him to follow, to demand the truth, to break the silence. He didn't. He remained in his study until long after I had retreated to the bedroom. Chapter 4, The Politeness of Distance. The next day, and the days that followed, were deceptively normal. Marcus made the coffee. He went to work. He inquired politely about my plans. But the gentle warmth was gone. The effortless companionship we had shared for 2 decades had vanished, replaced by a careful, distant civility. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself my guilt was manufacturing a problem where there wasn't one. He was simply stressed about a major engineering project. He was anxious about Leela leaving for college. I clung to these explanations because the alternative, that he knew and was simply waiting, was too terrifying to consider. I had no idea that the man I had consistently underestimated for 20 years, had already begun the quiet, meticulous work of dismantling my life. The storm wasn't coming with thunder and lightning. It was building in the profound, unnerving silence, and I was too preoccupied with the echo of my own lies to truly hear it. For 2 months, I lived inside that silence. I expected the dramatic, accusatory breakdown that would, in a terrible way, justify the heightened emotional intensity of my secret life. But Marcus gave me nothing. He was pleasant. He was cordial. He listened to my fabricated answers with a polite, detached interest that was far, far worse than any active interrogation. It was during this unnerving calm that Julian began pushing harder for a commitment. His venture capital firm was opening a new West Coast office, and he was being asked to head it. "Come with me, Eleanor," he'd urge, his voice full of that reckless, exciting energy. "We can start over. A new life where we don't have to hide." The idea was a siren's call. It was the perfect escape hatch from the suffocating quiet of my marriage, a chance to trade this beige existence for one in glorious, vibrant full color. I began the mental process of leaving, drafting the difficult conversation with Leela, calculating the legal steps. I was already packing my bags mentally. And in doing so, I became even more detached from the life I was still technically inhabiting. Chapter 5, The Metamorphosis. Marcus noticed my withdrawal, of course. How could he not? But he said nothing. Instead, he underwent a subtle, profound change. It was a slow metamorphosis that I almost missed at first, but it eventually became impossible to ignore. The man who had worn the same functional khakis and soft polo shirts for a decade suddenly started coming home in well-tailored charcoal trousers and crisp, modern button-downs. He started going to the gym, not with the grudging obligation of a middle-aged man, but with a focused, almost obsessive determination. He lost weight. His shoulders seemed to broaden, and a new, quiet confidence settled into his posture. Then he started working later. He mentioned he was mentoring a sharp junior partner at his firm, a woman named Chloe. He spoke about her with a palpable spark of intellectual admiration I hadn't heard him use in years. "She's sharp," he'd say over dinner, his eyes animated. "She has a completely different way of approaching structural, load distribution. It's truly refreshing." A cold, sharp sliver of jealousy lodged itself beneath my ribs. For 20 years, I had been the sole focus of his emotional and domestic world. A fact I had taken for granted and, in my darker moments, resented. Now, that focus had shifted. His phone, which had always been a purely utilitarian device, was now a constant companion. He'd smile at it sometimes, a small, private smile, before typing a quick, cryptic reply. The green-eyed monster I had never known I housed began to gnaw at me. How dare he? How dare he become interesting now? How dare he find intellectual stimulation, and I strongly suspected, admiration, from another woman. I began doing the very things I had once condemned in paranoid wives. I'd casually walk past his study when his phone was charging, trying to catch a glimpse of the screen. I checked the caller ID on the home phone. I even, God, the shame of it, pretended to be looking for a receipt and went through the pockets of the blazer he'd left on a chair. I found nothing, no lipstick-stained receipts, no incriminating notes, just a dry cleaning slip, and some loose change. The utter lack of evidence did not calm me. It made me more frantic. His life had developed a secret compartment, and I was locked out. I had been so focused on my own infidelity that I had failed to see his quiet, calculated exit. Chapter 6, The Unmasking. The first true fissure in my beautiful illusion with Julian appeared on a Friday. We had established a predictable routine: every Friday afternoon, a discreet suite at a boutique hotel downtown, always booked under my fictional friend, Susan's name. I was already feeling frayed, the gnawing jealousy over Marcus's new life, and the mysterious Chloe, having poisoned my mood all day. Then, a text from Julian arrived, just an hour before we were due to meet. "So sorry, Maggie. Major work emergency. Can't make it. Rain check." Disappointment curdled instantly into a familiar, low-grade anxiety. That night, restless and suspicious, I found myself scrolling through the professional social media account of one of Julian's colleagues. A post immediately caught my eye, a group photo from a trendy, exclusive rooftop bar in the city, time-stamped for that very evening. And there he was. Julian, in the center of the frame, his arm draped casually around the shoulders of a stunning young woman from his office. He was laughing, his face illuminated by the camera flash and her presence. He looked exactly the way he always did with me, happy, confident, completely in his element. The bottom dropped out of my stomach. The vibrant colors of my fantasy world drained away, leaving everything in shades of gray and corrosive acid. The realization was sickeningly clear: Julian wasn't the spark that would save me, he was just another convenience. Our grand, reckless romance was merely another secret he kept, another compartmentalized part of his already overscheduled life. The next morning, my voice shaking with a fury that was mostly fear and wounded pride, I confronted him over a video call. The work emergency was a rooftop bar, Julian. "Who is that woman?" He was dismissive, almost bored by my outburst. "It was a last-minute client drinks thing, Eleanor. She's on the project team. You're being paranoid." He then delivered the blow, perfectly aimed and utterly devastating. "You, of all people, should know how things can look." The words hung in the air between us, toxic and absolutely true. The man for whom I was ready to obliterate my family, for whom I was willing to sacrifice my reputation, was, I realized with chilling clarity, exactly like me. He was a professional liar, a master of compartmentalization, and utterly self-interested. Our affair wasn't a profound connection, it was a self-indulgent side quest. The vibrant, sun-drenched future in San Francisco suddenly looked like a lonely, corporate apartment where I would wait anxiously for a man who thought so little of me. "It's over," I said, my voice flat. The words required no effort, the decision was already made. His response was more relief than regret. "I understand, Eleanor. I truly wish you the best." I ended the call, left alone with the wreckage of my own making and the hollow, chilling dread of my new reality. I had been so focused on my own escape, on the elaborate betrayal I was committing, that I had utterly failed to notice that the ground beneath my feet had already been pulled away. Marcus wasn't just waiting for me to leave. He was already gone. Chapter 7, The Empty House. For a few weeks after ending things with Julian, I floated through the house in a state of paralyzed, consuming guilt. The adrenaline that had fueled my life for 6 months vanished, leaving behind profound emotional exhaustion, and a sense of existential panic. My immediate impulse was to confess everything to Marcus, to throw myself on his mercy, to beg for the chance to repair the foundation I had so wantonly destroyed. But the strange, new distance between us felt completely impenetrable. He was never unkind, never accusatory, but the familiar ease, the ability to simply exist in the same room, was gone, replaced by the polite, almost clinical demeanor one might use with a stranger. My confession felt less like a necessary truth and more like an imposition on his meticulously scheduled time. So, I stayed quiet. I began a desperate, over-the-top performance as the perfect wife, a futile attempt to reclaim the life I had discarded. I cooked his favorite elaborate meals. I asked eager, detailed questions about his projects at the firm. I suggested we watch movies together, attempting to break the crushing silence of the evenings. He accepted it all with that same infuriating, unshakable calm. He would eat my meals with polite appreciation, answer my questions with professional clarity, and sit beside me on the sofa, watching the screen with a placid detachment. His acceptance felt less like forgiveness and more like the tolerance one shows a particularly troublesome houseplant. The truth was, I was now desperately in love with the Marcus he had become. The man who was going to the gym, wearing sharp clothes, and discussing structural load distribution with Chloe. The man who had a hidden life. I hated the silent, dependable engineer I had married, and now I desperately desired the intriguing, unavailable man he had morphed into. Meanwhile, his professional focus became laser-sharp. The late nights grew longer, and the mentions of the junior partner, Chloe, became more frequent, always coupled with talk of innovation. Chloe had an interesting idea today about seismic bracing, he'd say. It ties directly into the new software I've been developing. It's a completely new way of calculating structural integrity on multi-use platforms. We're calling the core concept SIDS. I nodded, pretending interest. The acronym SIDS, Structural Integrity and Design Software, meaning nothing to me. I was too busy watching the way his eyes would light up, that spark of intellectual passion he once reserved, briefly, for the early days of our marriage. I was too busy fighting the consuming jealousy, the agonizing irony of my position. I was the wife who had cheated, yet I was consumed by the fear that I was being cheated on. It was during this period that I finally understood the truth about the quiet. The silence was not a vacuum waiting to be filled by my confession. It was the careful, deliberate soundproofing of a meticulous engineer constructing something immense, and irreversible. Marcus wasn't waiting to react. He had already acted. He was simply waiting for the structure to be complete before revealing the design. Chapter 8. The Firewall. The end began, as these things often do, with a perfectly ordinary, happy event. Leela was coming home for her first fall break from college. I was frantic with preparation, cleaning the house obsessively, planning elaborate dinners, desperate to reclaim the happy, functional family we once were. It was a final, desperate attempt to layer the old facade over the deep, jagged crack running through our foundation. The night before Leela arrived, Marcus suggested we have a proper family meeting after dinner the following evening. My heart, fragile and misguided, leapt with a tiny, reckless hope. This is it, I thought. He's going to acknowledge the strain. We'll finally talk, truly talk, and begin the painful, necessary work of fixing things. I still couldn't comprehend that he didn't want to fix things. The next day, after Lila's arrival, Marcus was engaged and funny, the most animated I had seen him in months. He felt like my Marcus again, warm, thoughtful, dependable. Dinner was a cheerful affair, filled with Lila's breathless stories about her new friends, her classes, and the freedom of university life. We felt, for those 2 hours, like the family from the framed photograph. But when the plates were cleared and he poured himself a glass of water, his demeanor shifted back into that unnerving, surgical calm. He folded his hands on the table, the portrait of controlled intention. "Leela, your mother and I have something we need to discuss with you," he began, his voice even, clear, and perfectly neutral. My breath caught. This was it? I braced myself for the difficult, painful, necessary truth. He continued, looking directly at our daughter, his expression one of gentle, profound sadness. "As you know, the two of us have been growing apart for some time now. We've tried to work through it, but we've decided that the healthiest thing for our family is to formally separate." I stared at him, my mouth agape. We've decided. We had decided nothing. I had been clinging to the wreckage, hoping for a lifeline, while he had been constructing a new vessel entirely. Leela looked between us, her face a mask of shock, confusion, and overwhelming hurt. "What? When did this happen? Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus gave a sad, gentle, utterly fabricated smile. "We didn't want to worry you while you were settling in, sweetheart. These things are complicated, but the decision is made." He then slid a thick manila envelope across the table to me. The paper was crisp, the seal official. "Eleanor," he said, using my full name, the one I used on legal documents, "these are the preliminary divorce papers. My lawyer has already gone over them. I think you'll find the terms are more than fair." The world seemed to slow down. This wasn't a discussion. It was an announcement, a formal execution of a plan I had been the unwitting facilitator of. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The first few pages were standard legal language, the terms of the separation. But as I flipped through, my blood ran cold, and the full, horrifying scope of his strategy clicked into place. Attached to the documents was a meticulously compiled file of my movements. There were printouts of hotel receipts, credit card statements showing dinners for 2 indiscreet downtown locations, a detailed log of my email history with Julian, the dates and times highlighted. There was even a receipt for the specific brand of expensive perfume Julian had liked. He knew everything. He had known for months. How? I whispered, my voice strangled. "That's not important," he said, his gaze steady, devoid of anger. "What's important are the terms." Chapter 9, The Final Clause. "You'll see I'm keeping the house and my primary retirement funds," Marcus continued, his voice as level as a blueprint. "You are being awarded a one-time lump sum alimony payment." I scanned the figure. It was generous, shockingly so, a massive payout that screamed magnanimity. But then my eyes caught the critical clause beside the number, the firewall he had so patiently built. In exchange for the aforementioned sum, the recipient, Eleanor and Vance, agrees to forfeit all future claims to the couple's shared assets, including, but not limited to, the husband's equity in his firm and any future proceeds from the patent currently pending for the structural integrity and design software, SIDS. The late nights. The new junior partner, Chloe. The animated discussions about structural load distribution. The refreshing ideas. It wasn't an affair. It was the ultimate professional distraction. He hadn't been having a romantic betrayal, he had been building an empire and legally walling it off from me. He had used my distraction, my moral absence, to pour all his energy into a proprietary software project so valuable that he had secured the patent before I even knew the project existed. "The patent," I stammered, the realization physically painful. "You did this. You planned this." "I worked very hard," he said, his voice utterly devoid of triumph, which made it all the more devastating. "This separation is the best path forward for everyone. It allows us both to move on with our lives cleanly." He looked at Leela, his expression softening with genuine, heartbreaking pain. "This is the hardest part, honey. None of this is your fault. Your mother and I both love you very much." He had orchestrated it all. He had let me continue in my affair, not because he was oblivious, but because it was the ultimate, necessary piece of evidence for his legal case. He had spent those 6 months not grieving, but becoming a better, more successful version of himself, making my eventual claims of a stale, neglected marriage look pathetic and self-serving. He had waited until the most impactful moment, the reunion with our daughter, to present his fait accompli, ensuring I was too stunned and ashamed to fight back. He had taken my betrayal and weaponized it into the perfect business and legal strategy. He made me the villain in the story, and he was the generous, wronged husband. Chapter 10, The Concession. I signed the papers a week later. There was no negotiation, no dramatic showdown in a lawyer's office. The payout was too generous to fight, the evidence he held, the meticulously documented log of my infidelity, was too devastating to risk having exposed. To drag it through court would mean laying every sordid detail of my affair bare, fighting a man who had outmaneuvered me at every turn. He had given me a golden parachute to ensure my silence. I walked away from the house, from the life, and from the man who had executed the greatest strategic victory I had ever witnessed. My exit was swift and silent. I purchased a small apartment downtown with the lump sum, an impersonal space high above the city noise, a stark contrast to the quiet suburban home I had abandoned and lost. The first month of separation was characterized by a profound, agonizing loneliness. I was free, but the freedom felt like a vast, cold desert. Julian was gone, a fleeting memory of reckless excitement. Leela was back at college, confused and hurt, communicating with me through texts that were polite but sparse. She was furious, not about the divorce itself, but about the timing, the calculated precision with which we had shielded her from the truth, only to drop the bomb during her first break home. I tried to tell her my side, the narrative of the neglected wife, the silent house. But the words tasted like ash. Marcus, in his conversations with her, never once spoke ill of me. He simply reiterated the agreed-upon narrative: your mother and I grew apart. It was a mutual, necessary decision. His restraint made my attempts to justify my behavior look small and hysterical. He had won the war of perception as decisively as he had won the war of assets. My days were empty. I returned to the Museum of Contemporary Art, but the art now looked hollow. The vibrant colors that Julian had introduced me to had lost their brilliance. I realized, with sickening clarity, that the color in my life hadn't come from Julian or the art, it had come from the guilt, the danger, and the secrecy. Now that the secret was gone, I was left with my own beige existence. Chapter 11, The Ascent. In the months that followed, Marcus's ascent was swift and undeniable, a constant, low-level pain. The engineering world began to buzz about SIDS, the structural integrity and design software. It was revolutionary, a comprehensive solution for managing complex architectural load to distribution in high-density urban environments. It was not just an improvement, it was a paradigm shift. Marcus and his junior partner, Chloe, became the faces of the innovation. I saw his picture everywhere, in business magazines, on industry news sites, even occasionally on local news features about the future of green urban development. He looked happy, successful, and completely fulfilled. The subtle metamorphosis I had witnessed had been completed. He was now the man of substance, the visionary I had always wished he would be. He hadn't found a spark, he had created a fire. The ultimate irony was that my reckless affair had provided the necessary catalyst. My absence had given him the time. My betrayal had given him the motivation. And my documented guilt had given him the ultimate legal shield. He had taken my weakest moment and turned it into his greatest professional triumph. I saw him one final time, months after the divorce was finalized, in the lobby of a high-rise office building downtown. I was meeting a former volunteer friend for coffee. He was coming down from a meeting on the 40th floor, accompanied by Chloe. Chloe was everything I had feared, sharp, impeccably dressed, and radiating competence. She walked beside him, discussing a complex detail about a new contract, her eyes bright with intellectual respect. There was no hint of romance, only a powerful professional partnership. Marcus spotted me near the elevators. He paused. He didn't look startled, only mildly inconvenienced, as if running into a former acquaintance at the airport. He walked over to me alone. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet. "Marcus. You look well." The words felt forced, pathetic. "I am well?" The SIDS patent cleared the final hurdle last week. His tone was factual, not boasting. "Congratulations," I managed. There was a silence, heavy and complete, but this time, the weight was entirely mine. "Leela is doing well. She's applying for a summer internship in civil engineering." "That's wonderful," I whispered. He looked at me, and his eyes, the eyes that had been flat stones that night in the study, now held a profound, unshakable peace. There was no malice in them, no residual anger. Just clarity. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Eleanor," he said. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he wasn't just talking about the future. He was talking about the past. He had found what he was looking for, not revenge in the fiery, dramatic sense, but a cold, permanent, and utterly complete victory. He had taken my betrayal, and with the quiet, methodical patience that had always defined him, he had used it to build himself a far better life, one I was no longer a part of. Chapter 12, The Final Calculation. The taxi pulled away from the curb. I watched Marcus return to Chloe, his professional partner. They walked out of the building together, Marcus pointing to a new construction site, his posture confident, his voice animated. He was already building the next chapter. The cruelest cut of all was the realization that the greatest revenge was not in making me suffer dramatically, but in showing me, in exquisite, undeniable, financial, and emotional detail, exactly what I had thrown away. I had sought an escape from a life I deemed too small and too quiet. I had craved noise, color, and drama. Marcus, the engineer, had given me exactly what I wanted, the intense, terrible drama of my own exposure, followed by the deafening quiet of my own solitude. He then used the resulting vacuum to construct a life of unparalleled intellectual and professional satisfaction. I was left with the lump sum payout, the money he had granted me to silence my conscience. It was generous enough to keep me comfortable, but it felt worthless compared to the equity, the purpose, and the future I had forfeited. The money was my only reward for being the villain in his story. It has been 2 years. I still live in the apartment downtown. I still volunteer, but I am learning to appreciate the real quiet now, the one that comes from having no secrets, no alibis to maintain. I see Leela regularly. Our relationship is healing, slowly, painfully. She knows the truth, or at least, the legal truth, that her father and I separated and that I received a large settlement. She doesn't know the full details of the betrayal, and I pray she never does. Marcus's silence protects her, and for that, I am eternally grateful. I understand now that Marcus's quiet consistency was not a lack of passion, it was a profound, unshakable strength. It was the strength to sustain a life, to maintain a foundation, and ultimately, the strength to execute a calculated strategy without fury or dramatic outburst. He taught me the hardest lesson of my life: never underestimate the power of quiet observation. Never mistake stability for weakness. I chose the reckless spark, and it burned out instantly. He chose the slow, methodical fire, and it forged an empire. The final irony is that I am now a woman of means, capable of starting fresh, of building a new life. But the most valuable asset I possess, the moral high ground, the loyalty of my family, the purpose of a shared history, those were the things Marcus kept. He didn't need revenge, he just needed to be rid of me so he could build his magnificent life. My greatest failure was providing him with the perfect blueprint. And in the silence of my city apartment, I realized that the victory was not the divorce itself. The victory was Marcus's profound, unshakable peace, earned through integrity, industry, and the terrifying precision of a mind I never bothered to truly understand. The end.